They've invaded my network. I've got shareholders and some executives saying, fix this, fix this, fix this. And somebody contacts them and says, I can stop this attack for $100 million. The answer is,
let's say they paid that $100 million. That group that launched that attack is saying they are going to leak terabytes of data.
well, that's the double extortion, right? And there's even a third level where I worked with NSA pretty closely in my time in the FBI and some of the best technical minds. So more than 50% of traffic now on the internet is mobile. So mobile is going to continue to be an avenue of attack, and the criminals go where the data is. If you don't have 24/7 coverage on a phone or on a tablet, I could use that as an avenue attack.
That's nuts because everybody has a mobile phone in their pocket.
There is a sophistication to gaining access into corporate environments. We're seeing a rise of that where people are putting other people's faces onto AI videos or doing job interviews and acquiring access to.
Why should the average American care about that?
When things are happening outside the United States, so maybe our attack against Iran or Russia, feeling like we're outside of our lanes, the hackers are always going to go where the data is or the money is. I think it was Dillinger that said, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money's at. Of course I'm going to steal it. You would think people would be on high alert, but they're not.
If there's one thing a business should do, what's going to get the most bang for the buck?
First question to ask a customer: who's watching your environment at 2 a.m. on Saturday morning? And why are we not changing the way we are defending?
Welcome to What the Tech, your gateway to business strategies and tech secrets shaping today's workplace. I want you to welcome back to the show, James Morrison. Hey, James.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Good to see you again. A lot has changed since the last time you and I talked, and I want to jump right into it. Last time you were here, we talked a lot about Worm GPT, the rise of AI tools that hackers are using, infrastructure hacking, social engineering, all sorts of attacks that the FBI in the last several months, as well as NSA, have been jumping into and announcing to the public to be looking at. What's the most pressing security threat that you're seeing that people should be paying attention to?
I always break it down into two groups. We talk individually and we talk corporately. I think corporately, what we have to really have an understanding with, and we'll talk around AI in particular, is that there is a sophistication to gaining access into corporate environments. So like, AI video, we're seeing a rise of that where people are actually putting other people's faces onto AI videos or doing job interviews. We've seen some cases of people doing job interviews and acquiring access to corporate environments. I think that's going to continue to be an issue until we can figure out a good way to defeat that. I think at the same point is we've seen a little bit of a drawdown from the government perspective of reduction of, whether it's Homeland Security, whether it's FBI, they're still very focused on dark web technology, things like that, but they're not doing a lot of the preparation side. And so I am concerned that we're going to see, kind of a rise in attacks based upon the perception that the government, and this is just perception, I'm not trying to say it, isn't there to protect us as much. We've also seen a rise in targeting around infrastructure again. And this seems to sometimes echo when things are happening outside the United States. So maybe our attack against Iran or Russia, feeling like we're outside of our lanes. And I think we've got to really have a deep understanding around infrastructure protection, water protection, and sewer and all those areas, those OT environments.
Why should the average American care about that? They're missing, yeah, it's terrible if the power goes out, right? Nobody likes that. That doesn't happen that often in this country. But why should they care? The government does. Well, why should it matter to me? I'm not impacted by that.
Well, you are, and more than you think about it. I think sometimes we sort of take for granted, the grid and water. And what's interesting was sewer. We saw this in Hurricane Harvey in particular in Houston. The sewer backed up. They had to close down hospitals because of lack of sanitary conditions and stuff like that. So infrastructure in particular is something that we've always considered that the government was doing its fair job, but we really need to understand that this is an area that, because there's so many different environments and across the United States, that if the states are kind of left up to regulate it, I'm not so sure we're going to see a continuity of operations that's consistent across all 50 states.
I would imagine that people would be very upset if their water wasn't sanitary. I know we've had all kinds of incidents in the US where even other chemicals are in the water, but if drinking water, bathing water, Hospitals can't use the water. We'd have major problems, major, major, major problems. Speaking of problems, I want to get your take on a couple of attacks that have happened in the last several months since we last spoke. Some very notable ones like Oracle Cloud, one on National Defense Corporation. Obviously, that's more on the military side. There were North Korean hackers that stole about a billion, 1.5 billion. I'm looking at it on my notes.
Yep.
1.5 billion in crypto. And for us in our world of things in technology specifically for folks that sell products that are in the IT space, Ingram Micro recently had a big attack and they were down for about a week. And that was almost about $1 billion in lost revenue to them.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I think the hackers are always going to go where the data is or the money is, right? So the banks realized really early on. We saw this in the early 2010s. We saw a string of attacks targeting banks, targeting things like the SWIFT financial system, and the banks were regulated. They had that, the GLBA and certain things like that. And so they really dove deep into securing those portions of it. When we look at unregulated financial markets like cryptocurrency, they're going to be a little slower to jumping into some of that because they're not regulated. They don't have those requirements. And so the hackers are going to go there. I think it was Dillinger that said, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Because that's where the money's at." And so cryptocurrency is going to be the same thing. If I can get to a cryptocurrency exchange that isn't well protected, of course I'm going to steal it, right? So then when you
Mm,
look at companies like Ingram Micro and these larger organizations, again, and Oracle Cloud, the criminal understands that. And this to me is just simply a pivot from the attacks we've already seen. They were targeting things like solar winds and aggregators of information because they knew that they could then take that one application and spread ransomware or data theft into every customer of that environment. And so Ingram
oh,
Micro being such a large provider of services and technology, think about their customer base.
yeah.
So if I'm a bad guy, I now have access to their customer base and can exploit more people, more victims. And I think that's why a company like Ingram Micro was targeted. And so companies like CDW and companies like Carasoft, which are very large providers of technology, but also large provider of technology into defense space, you brought up defense space, they're really thinking about, wow, how did that happen? And how do we make sure it doesn't happen to us?
Help me break that down, James. Let's go back a little bit.
Yeah,
This was not that long ago from when we're recording this. The attackers have been attributed to the SafePay ransomware group.
correct.
You're in the IT space. You're a cybersecurity. You were formerly at the FBI. Put your investigator hat on.
Oh, yeah.
What's the
I always
most
like, yeah.
but let's put it back on. What's the most probable thing that unfolded with this attack? And what do you think's the first thing that happened here? Because I think that there's some application to many businesses that are listening to this. So put that hat back on. Tell me what probably unfolded in the first hours of this attack.
For the Ingram Micro.
Yes.
So most likely what we see in a lot of sales environments is the networks are separate, but not separate. You probably have an HR group, you have a direct sales company, you have the infrastructure group. And so it was probably a pretty innocent drive-by attack. And this is, again, I haven't looked enough into it. I'd have to dive deeper to really know. But it was probably something relatively innocent and low level. Still starting with phishing, still starting with a vulnerability exploitation, got in, got a small foothold. And the criminal, I always say, the criminal's looking for three things once they get that foothold. They've got to get persistence. They got to figure out, how am I going to stay in this environment when they reload, when they reset. They want to escalate privileges. They want to get up to either local admin or, of course, the gold standard is getting domain admin. And then the third thing is they want to make sure that they can expand laterally across the network. So probably what happened is there probably was a foothold in an administrative side of the house, or like HR or finance. Seems to be a lot of groups that are targeted. And then they had enough time, they had enough dwell time in the network to start doing some reconnaissance and then expanding. By the
Wow.
time they were recognized, they probably moved into one of the more sensitive networks that had a better technical protection in there. And that was when the alarm got triggered. That's normally what we see is in a lot of those environments, they have a disparate environment where maybe they've got their really heavy duty endpoint product and MDR product on the technical team, but they may not have that across the entire space.
Here's some stats around that particular attack that I find amazing.
Yeah.
That shutdown went across all the business platforms. It was global. So everything was down. Their page was down. Their email communications were down for a while. They could not send any orders out. And that alone was about, from what I read, $136 million a day of global loss to them in terms of revenue. So this attack was about 7 days, almost $1 billion.
But think about it from the criminal aspect, right? So I can go to you and say, every day I hold your network ransom or hostage, you're losing this money. How much is it to you to pay me?
Do you think they paid? So that's the important question, especially to even small business, because
Yep.
obviously most small businesses are not producing $136 million a day. It may be as small as $10,000 a day that is small, but I hear that small businesses are about half the attacks. But with something like this, you're talking a bigger company, obviously higher profile. What are the chances? What's the probability? You guys operate in probability back in the FBI. What's the probability that they actually paid something?
I'd say the high probability was high. Once I've lost that battle, so I kept them off the beaches, right? We talk about it from a military aspect. I couldn't keep them off the beaches. They've invaded my network now. They own my network at this point. I've got shareholders. I've got, executives saying, fix this, fix this, fix this. And if the security team didn't feel they had control of it, and somebody contacts them and says, I can stop this attack for $100 million, the answer is so easy from a corporate standpoint. They're like, I'll pay that $100 million to stop this attack. So I would bet pretty good money that there was some sort of payout to stop the damage.
And the thing about that, and I just want to, and a thing that I found surprising, let's say they paid that $100 million, because that's what I really wanted to get. Let's say pay that 100 million. That group that launched that attack is saying they were later going to threaten to leak 3.5 terabytes of data, 3.5 terabytes of data. That's not a little itty bitty piece. We don't know what's in that data, but we can surmise that it could be their customer list, like you said. It could be about other operations that they're planning on doing or future planning.
Well, that's the double extortion, right? So we call it, that's the second extortion. The first
Mm.
one is, I've got your network, right? I'm holding your network hostage, pay me to get it back. That second extortion is, oh, by the way, I've also stolen all of your data, and I'm going to publish all of this data. And that's not just going to damage you, but it's going to damage your customers and their environment. And there's even a third level where they go into individual customer data looking for, so they would then contact your customers, and each customer could be extorted based
Wow.
upon the data that's located within that. So that's the problem with this large aggregation of data, is there's a lot of victims that could be associated with it. We were talking, I think it was, it's been 2 years now, where CDK, which was for car dealerships, they got taken over and they didn't even know what cars they had on their lot, because
Wow.
this particular software was what they used for inventory and pricing for every car, used and new. And it happened, I think, right around the Memorial Day, and it lasted for a number of weeks. And people were out there having to write on paper what cars they had and what was the pricing of it. So we have a reliance on software as a service. We have a reliance on cloud-based aspect, but we also need to have a better conversation about, how am I securing that, and how am I making sure that third-party product isn't adding an additional risk into my environment. And that's a big marketplace right now, is third-party risk.
You know what you just said that really is interesting? You said that other attack was around Memorial Day. This attack was just right before the 4th of July. It seems not random at all.
No.
It's very coordinated because in America, right, most people will go on break. A lot of people are out of the office, not even paying attention. Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, these types of major holidays. It would seem that those are the times when IT and security folks should be on high alert, if we were to use a government term, high
Yep.
alert on those weekends or those holidays, because shit may hit the fan. Let's just put it that way.
We saw it all the time. I mean, we've always said that most of the ransomware attacks and large data exfiltrations happen on weekends and holidays. It's
Wow.
just the nature of it. And to your point, there is usually a reduced manpower. There is usually, probably, especially in the summer, more people are on vacation. And you would think people would be on high alert, but they're not. And so if you don't have 24/7 management of your environment, so who I always ask the first question I ask a customer, who's watching your environment at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning? Well, I get alerted. Okay, you get alerted. How long to respond? It could be hours. That may be too long. And so I think that's one of the basic questions I always ask is who's watching the fence when you're not there?
Wow. Is there anything about that that surprises you about either the hackers themselves and the way they're attacking and evolving or the customer side? Is there anything about that that still surprises you?
The customer side still surprises me is I guess I don't always understand. We know this, right? Ransomware has been going on now for a pretty solid 12, 14 years, and we know the basics of it. We understand we got the MITRE attack framework and we have the kill chain, the Lockheed Martin kill chain. So we know how the attacker is going to proceed. Why are we not changing the way we are defending? And I have different philosophies and theories on some of that. I call it security through obscurity. They won't find me. So that doesn't work. And small and medium businesses fall into this all the time. Why would somebody want to attack you? They don't care what you do. They don't care. They just think if they can get into your environment, how much is your data worth? If I can keep your network, and Ingram Micro is a perfect example. If I can keep your network offline day after day after day, what's your daily loss rate? At what point in time will you pay me to give you your network back?
Just to circle back on Ingram, I'm surprised it took that long because
Yeah.
they're in a very cash intensive business. The whole selling hardware bit, and there's lots of companies that sell IT solutions. That's a very cash intensive business because they got to keep millions of dollars around the world available for their customers.
I would love to be a fly on the wall. I want to know what conversations were being had at that high level. Was somebody promising the CEO, we got this, we got this, we got this, and they ain't got this, right? Is it
Mm.
something like that? Was it nobody wanted to pull the trigger on it? Was the insurance company involved in saying, no, we're not paying, we're not paying? Those where I want to be a fly on the wall of those meetings because to me, it's a resume generating event. Somebody's getting fired or somebody should be fired if it took
Mhm.
that long. And if I'm the board of directors or if I'm a shareholder, I'm like, why do we lose this amount of money? So I think there's a lot of those conversations that are had at a very high level that sometimes when they see the light of day, it's amazing to me the thought processes that go in people's head of why didn't we solve this sooner? But then you have the pipeline where the guy made the call to pay the ransom within hours. And did he need
Mhm.
to? So there is a measured approach, right? So what's the right answer? I don't know where the right answer is. It's different, but I think days is too long. And I think probably an hour or 2 hours is too short. So somewhere between 2 hours and 72 hours, we got to make a decision means that the tech team, the security team needs to have enough self-awareness to say, I don't have this. We need to do
Mm.
something and be willing to declare that this is as bad as it is. So I also wonder if there wasn't some minimization of saying, yeah, it's not that bad. It's not that bad until it became that clear.
Well, if we think about it for a moment, July 3rd, I think the 3rd was the day they launched the attack. The 3rd was on a Thursday.
Okay.
And if you launch the attack that day, the 4th is on a Friday.
Yeah. So nobody on right. And most
So
people were off on Thursday that week.
they were off even starting that week, right?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of I remember a lot of people going on vacation Monday. So people start leaving Tuesday, even Wednesday, Thursday. So now you get people in vacation mode already by Thursday, right?
Right. Right.
Let's say you launch that in the evening, right? 4th comes around, day 1. What the heck's going on? Where's
Yeah.
Joe? Where's Sam? Where's Susie? Saturday, I'm checked out. That's just it's not my job to do X, Y, Z, fill in the blank.
Right.
Sunday comes around, it hasn't gone away. Oh, wait, we don't have control. Monday comes around, everybody like get back to work. And you've got people all on holiday everywhere, probably around the world.
Sure.
Their phones are ringing. So now you've got at least 4 days where people are scattered and not exactly sure what's happening. You can't communicate because they closed off their platforms. Their VPNs, they finally realized that that was the vector that was used to get into the network. And I don't know if, like you said, that maybe the communication chain and the flow of what should happen probably wasn't there to know who's in control, who
Well,
should speak for us, who
so
should make the
two
decision.
aspects there, right? So two aspects. One, the VPN is an interesting one, the avenue attack, and I hadn't dug deep, but that doesn't surprise me. We've been seeing that. Again, aggregation of data. Where are all the customers? So because people are using more VPNs because of remote access, they're looking to take over these VPN providers. So it
Mhm.
means you as a customer, who are you using for your VPN? Third party risk. VPN provider is third party risk. The second aspect that you brought up was how long does it take to make a decision, right? And weekends are difficult times to make that decision. And I think, especially if you're a company that runs 24/7 and worldwide, somebody has to be able to make that decision on the time on the weekend. Somebody has to be able to jump in and say, we got to do something right now. And I do wonder if somebody didn't feel like they had the ability to make that call until Monday morning when all the bidwigs come back and then they're like, what's going on here?
Mhm, mhm. Interesting. Let's turn the conversation now. So we've been talking a lot about businesses. Let's talk about individuals because
Yeah.
a lot is happening on the individual front. One of the most, I'll say, one of the things that I think can impact both individuals and companies alike is how Microsoft is moving everything over to Windows 11. I
Yeah.
want to know, do you think that's a lot of what Microsoft, and they've been getting really tough about, you got to do it. Is it hype in terms of the security threats that they're talking about, or is it more real and people should pay attention to it and go ahead and migrate?
I don't think it's hype. I will say what's funny about Microsoft is Microsoft was kind of the big baddie back in the day, in the 90s and the 2000s. Everybody was like, oh, here we go with more features and whatever. Microsoft has really turned around to be more of that security forward company that I don't think we've always expected. I think they recognize it. They say, yeah, we can't defend Windows 10 now. There's changes in architecture and computers. There's changes in AI. There's changes in all of this data that we're using. So our company's getting ready to cut it over. Matter of fact, I think we start on Monday where we're cutting everything over to Windows 11. So I do believe that in this particular case, it's not just a nice to have, it's probably a must have. I've got some computers at home, they can't make the change, they don't have to build
I've
them.
got a laptop that I was you couldn't. It was like, no, no, dude, you can't do it on this one. But I had another one that where it is inside the computer, it tells you, yeah, you can upgrade
Yeah, I've
to
got
Windows
my
11.
old gaming computer and I'm like, it has the processor's too old. And I'm like, well, do I upgrade it? Because I'd have to get a new motherboard, new processor, new
The whole
RAM.
thing.
And I'm like, so now I'm getting close to $800, $900. And I'm like, or do I just buy another one or I leave it on 10? So there's all these questions in your brain. But think about that from a corporate standpoint. Corporations are asking the exact same question. I have 100 computers and they're all old technology. Let's say half of them are. Let's say I've got some tech debt. Half of them are not ready for Windows 11. Well, I can't cut them until all of them are ready. So I've got this hardware purchase on the front end that I have to do. Then I have to figure out how I'm going to cut over 11. And I got to make sure all of my corporate applications are able to be supported by Windows 11. So there's a lot of that regression testing. Most companies aren't even there. And I think that's going to be a big challenge. And unfortunately, it's like when we left, I think it was Windows XP, which was like everybody had Windows XP.
Yep.
I think it was Windows 8 that we went to after that or 7, can't remember. A lot of people stayed on XP for a long, long time until Windows said we aren't supporting this anymore many years later. So I think now they're just saying we're going to cut that cord a little sooner on Windows
Yeah,
10.
that's what I'm hearing as well. And when you think about Windows, this is just one of the pieces of the pie in trying to build a better, secure world for both individuals and businesses. One of the things that I've been paying more attention to is seeing what your former employer, the FBI, has been releasing in terms
Yeah.
of some of the threats. One of the things I saw a recent article on Forbes, I'm just going to read it to you to see what you think. A recent Forbes mentioned cyber criminals obtain a remember me cookie, like warning about cookie theft. What is cookie theft? This article says the remember me cookie that is from a user's recent login. That cookie can be used to sign in without needing the user's name, password, or multi-factor authentication. And the FBI emphasizes cyber criminals are increasingly focused on stealing these types of cookies as their preferred way of accessing a victim's email. I was blown away. What is that?
So when you go and log into your email, right? So
Mhm.
like I just logged into my email account over here. I log in and it says, remember this browser. So there's a little click at the bottom that
Right,
says,
right.
remember it for 180 days. So what now I've done is that I've created a cookie that says this browser, and it puts the browser information and it puts my user information in there. And as long as that cookie's resident on my computer, it won't ask me to log back in. So there's this interrogation between my local computer and the server that says, yes, this is the same person.
Right.
And so absolutely, I'd be targeting that. I'm looking at anything that would help me identify myself as you, right? And especially with email services, cloud services, we see it even with two-factor authentication. Some of the two-factor authentication may not be as secure as others because it creates that cookie or creates some sort of persistence.
Yeah.
And we do it for convenience. So remember, I always say convenience and security are divergent.
Mhm.
So if I do things that are making life more convenient, there may be a security aspect to it that we are accepting. We're accepting that particular part. And I think what Windows has realized is it's hard for them to defend. The current environment is built around an edge, right? So the browser is built into it and built into the kernel, built into the operating system. So without completely ripping out edge and redoing it, it's probably easier at the end just to rebuild the whole operating system and rebuild the way it secures files like cookies and other things.
We operate in the e-commerce space. We were talking about Ingram earlier. One of the things that I find very fascinating is on the attack side is that I've heard of more folks that are in the e-commerce space, not called Ingram. They're much smaller business, and their identities are stolen. And when they go they go online, they could log in, let's say to either Ingram or Amazon or eBay, one of the marketplaces. The criminals have been able to replicate who they are and able to get into those systems, change the banking accounts, change the logins so that the actual business owner can't do that any longer. And so they've
Right.
hijacked their information. One of the things I think you may have mentioned, but I know I've read it somewhere that the use of passkeys can help thwart a lot of this. Explain to me, and for a lot of folks that could very easily do this with their own computers, what is a passkey?
So passkeys are a passwordless form of authentication, right? So it again creates a key, a encrypted key that's created between you and the provider. It could be like a cookie, but it's not as much. It's just a way to authenticate you that is persistent, is secure. It does not require me to enter in a password. So it's a lot harder for it to get broken into. The biggest thing about the passkey, though, is that the passkey is now something else to be targeted by the criminal.
Mm,
So the passkey is stored. So there is a storage location for it. And I think that's the other thing I think I'd be interested to see, and I don't know this for sure, if Windows 11 isn't built around that idea too.
it is.
Yeah.
So
So one of the problems we've ran into in the past was, for example, when you would use a browser, you would store the password in the browser. And that password is stored in a SQL, a database, and that database may not have been secured as strongly as we thought. Now, technology is changing so fast that maybe what was a good security feature 10 years, it's been 10 years for Windows 10. We've been doing this a long time.
yeah,
So now with new technologies, new AI, new ways of breaking in, I need to think of better ways to secure it within the operating system. I think that's what Windows 11 is built around, this idea of how to support passwordless authentication, passkeys, but also how to secure those passkeys in a way that they're not going to be exploited by criminal activity.
let's talk to exploit. I'm glad, ooh, just like you read all my notes. Let's talk exploit. The folks that have some of the best computing power under their roof, probably not under roof because it's spread out over many data centers, is NSA. And NSA issued a warning of sorts a couple months ago and saying, hey, folks, you should turn your mobile phones on and off at least once a week because of the so-called zero-click exploits. What is that? And why should people pay attention to NSA? Aren't they the spies? Why are they trying to help us?
So it's kind of funny, history lesson, right? You saw my master's degree in history. NSA, when the internet was first created, wanted to be the group that was managing it. They felt
Mm,
like they had the technical expertise to manage and secure the internet back in the day. And it was sort of decided no to leave it open. So I worked with NSA pretty closely in my time in the FBI, and probably some of the best technical minds I've ever run into. Really sharp people. And so because they are the attacker, they do offensive penetration testing. there is no better person to know how to defend something than the same person that's going to break into your area.
Oh,
And so that's why NSA, I think, coming out with this is fascinating because we have seen some ransomware that doesn't require you to do anything, or we've seen some malware that you install a product or you make a decision on a different technology, and then it installs this malware that you don't even have to click on it to run it. So sometimes it's just, I saw one, I'm trying to remember the exact details of it, but it was fascinating because on our phone, we always see this with things like taking pictures, right? Where be careful of taking QR codes because they're competitive with QR codes. But in this particular case, it was embedded in the phone and it stayed in memory. It was memory resident. That's why you have to turn your phone off. But it would activate simply by you activating an application. So it was sometimes triggered by something that you would think to be fairly innocent, but it wasn't a traditional click on a link, click on a document. It was activated more by things you do, activity. So for example, if I could put ransomware on facial recognition, right? So the facial recognition software that pops up, every time you did facial recognition, it would also activate that application at the same time. So it's
wow.
it's it's piggybacking the malware off of another application that you normally use. And so you don't take an active role in clicking on the malware is activated by a secondary process.
That's nuts because everybody has a mobile phone in their pocket. Some
Yep.
people carry around two of them, right? And the mobile has become also a vector for those attacks. I've also seen some data where SMS, of all things,
Yep.
is still something now that people still getting.
Yep.
And there's some efforts to harden RSC, which is the messaging between iPhone and Android world. But still, the regular old plain text messages, those are not secure. And the very, very expert level cyber attackers know how to use SMS to essentially take over your phone as well.
Yeah. So more than 50% of traffic now on the internet is mobile, right? So phones and tablets, it's over 50% now. Most corporations have some sort of bring your device BYOD process, or companies are buying their own phones. So mobile is going to continue to be an avenue of attack. Again, the criminals go where the data is. So because of that, we do have to have a much more kind of broad view of how could I be exploited. I do a lot of presentations on people getting exploited with relationship fraud or exploited through cryptocurrency fraud and exchange fraud or account takeovers, right? So if I can get on your phone, I know that what's on your phone are things like credit card numbers. I know that there's access to your emails, access to corporate accounts. And even if you're using a VPN, I have access to the endpoint. I don't care what VPN you're using. I become an infected endpoint on your network. And so if you don't have 24/7 coverage on a phone or on a tablet, I could use that as an avenue attack into an environment. So that's what we are also seeing is we're seeing companies trying to deploy endpoint security products onto phones now because phones are getting to that point where they have enough memory to do that.
If there's one thing a business should do, what's that number one thing that's going to get them the most bang for the buck with the thing that you're going to tell them to do?
I think you got to have somebody monitoring your network 24/7. In today's environment, that was one reason I came here. I'm running a SOC, a 24/7 SOC operation, because I really do believe that is where the rubber meets the road. Every endpoint can be victimized. Every one of them, servers, endpoint, desktops, laptops. So I think that would be the first thing I would look at is I don't care if you've got Sentinel-1. I don't care if you've got CrowdStrike. The endpoint products are all great. But if you're not having somebody watching that really beautiful endpoint product and making sure that somebody's not doing bad things on that product, you're not going to know when somebody steps on a landmine and does bad things. So that's where I've started. For individuals, make sure you have an endpoint product. I would start at the endpoint product, have an endpoint product and have a plan around that of make sure you're paying the annual fee for whether it's, Sentinel-1, whether it's Bitdefender, or whatever that product is.
Well, landmines are here to stay, unfortunately. It's an old term, but they have become virtual. Virtual landmines are not going away. James, we could spend another 2 hours just talking about this because there's so much more to dive into. But I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today, sharing with us, enlightening us, telling us what's really going on and how other companies as well as individuals can be safer with their mobile phones and computers. You know, if this podcast has spoken to you, it's resonated with you, I invite you to go ahead and subscribe to it, drop a comment. And one thing we're going to do that we haven't done in the past, all of the sources and articles that we've talked about in this podcast is going to be available via Notebook LM. So you can nerd out some more, find out exactly what James is talking about, where am I getting these quotes from. We're going to leave a link in the description so you can go check that out yourself and see and peruse. You can also chat with the Notebook LM chatbot and ask it many, many, many questions. I'm really loving Notebook LM right now. And lastly, if your business is complex, you've got security needs, you've got IT needs, that's what Global Tech does. We've been around for over 20 years, helping businesses and people get those complex business solutions simplified so that they can actually take action on some of these plans. And I want to thank James for coming in today. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you about how to close more deals. I talked to former hostage negotiator Derek Gaunt. He had a very interesting phrase that you can use to close more deals and prevent people from ghosting you. Go check that episode out, and I will see you in that episode.